Hi, everybody. It's Tim Constantine with you. And for America, it's David Bozell. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Good, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks. You know, it's funny in presidential elections how there are certain seemingly tiny moments, maybe seem like they are meaningless little moments that grab hold of people. I think back to 1988 when Michael Dukakis was the nominee for the Democratic Party, and somebody decided he should sit in a tank. And you had this little guy who was the governor of Massachusetts who looked so out of place and so uncomfortable. And here we are, I don't know, 35 years later, and I still remember it. And many people would say that was a turning point where he started to lose because he seemed inauthentic. I think we had one of those moments this past week. Donald Trump went to a McDonald's. Donald Trump put on the apron and started serving up French fries, talking to people as they came through the drive-thru. He couldn't have looked more at ease. He couldn't have looked more comfortable. But Kamala Harris and her team made fun of him for it. Oh, this was staged. No kidding. He's former president of the United States and a billionaire. Of course he's not working at McDonald's. Part of the point was not just to be amongst the people. Part of the point was Kamala Harris claims in her effort to be one of the regular people that she worked at McDonald's when she was in school, except McDonald's has no record of it. And it seems to me that's a tiny little thing that has a big impact, because if you would lie about that, what else would you lie about? What are your impressions on the whole McDonald's story of this giant presidential election?
Yeah, there's a ton of layers to it. She had never mentioned working at McDonald's in any previous job application, ever. The first time she ever mentioned it publicly was in 2019 to the Nevada Culinary Workers rally that she did. You know, imagine that. So she had never mentioned it. I really find it hard to believe, Tim, that the government that she indirectly controls, as massive and as prolific as it is at finding needles, little needles and massive haystacks of needles, cannot confirm that she ever, when and where anyone ever worked.
And let me stop you right there and ask you a question. Let me ask you, what was your first job? I worked at a grocery store, was my first hourly wage job. I can tell you exactly where that store was. I can tell you who the store manager was. I can tell you who the front end manager of that grocery store was. I can tell you the details because it was my first job. She claims that was her first job. Surely she remembers where it was. Maybe remembers who her shift manager was. Remembers something that could verify it, and yet not a word.
And not even an ounce of curiosity from the press that follows her day to day. I mean, that's the really frustrating thing. Okay, so she says it was in Alameda, California. Okay, well, is anybody still living in and around that McDonald's that may or may not have been there that can confirm at least the McDonald's existence in Alameda? Give me a street corner. You're right. I mean, I remember working as a lifeguard, my first job. I know exactly what neighborhood, how to get there. Just give me into the neighborhood, I can get you there. But no curiosity from the press. Snopes saying, well, it's unprovable, therefore you cannot criticize the claim on social media. When conservatives complain about big tech election interference, this is the kind of thing they're talking about. This is Snopes, this supposed fact checker, prolific fact checker that Facebook and others use, basically taking the social out of social media. You cannot socialize this claim. You cannot discuss its veracity, and then compare it to this Atlantic story that's kind of fallen flat, this week, because it's not true. But God, believe the press tried to get it going. This absurd claim that former President Trump was mad that when he offered to pay for a woman's funeral services, the families, they said it was $60,000, and this absurd claim that he got upset by that. No one will go on the record and confirm that. Nobody. But the press breathlessly says, well, it must be true because no one can prove that it's not true. But it's the exact opposite of the McDonald's story.
Yeah, it's funny because
this is why people don't believe these guys anymore.
Kamala Harris is 3 weeks older than I am. Our birthdays are 3 weeks apart from each other. We are virtually the same age. And so our life experience happened at the same time. And I can tell you, I could name half a dozen people that I worked with on that first job. And if you said to me, Tim, prove you worked at Doug's Shop and Save, I could. Particularly if I had $1 billion I had raised for my campaign. I would be able to dig in and find Mark or Peter or Michael or one of those other guys I worked with, and they could say, oh, yes, Tim wore that brown apron right beside me. You know, it's not that hard to prove, but the inauthenticity is what matters to me. It's not whether she worked at McDonald's, it's did she make this up in order to try to say that. If you remember in 2019, when she was going to run for president as the Democratic nominee, but flamed out fairly early, she did an interview, and to try to enhance her street credibility, she was being criticized in the black community for prosecuting pot smokers and pot dealers in her days in the state attorney's office. So she said, no, I used to get stoned in college. And to prove her point, she said, yeah, we used to sit around listening to and she named 2 or 3 different artists, Tupac and Snoop Dogg, getting stoned when she was in college. The problem was, I just got done telling you, she's my age. College would have been 1983 to 1987. Where was Tupac in 1987? He didn't have a single song released then. She was fabricating a story in order to seem like she was part of the gang. She did it then. I think she's doing it now. And while I'm not a big Harris fan anyway, I think there are people who are undecided that pick up on that inauthenticity.
I know the gentleman who hired me for my first job, and I know that he's since passed away. Could I find an employment record? Maybe not. But I know the people that were there with me every single day. And if you're in a tight quarter situation like McDonald's, man, unless you lasted a day and quit, which there's a story in and of itself. I'd have more respect for her if she said, I hated it. It was not for me. Restaurant work was not for me, so I bailed. Okay, fine. But I don't think it's true either. I think Trump is right to challenge her. I think Trump is right to poke a little fun at her and go work at that McDonald's. It owned the cycle. It looks like, and he's having fun chiding her for this claim. And it just exposes her. If you're so willing to lie so flippantly about that, then you're right, Tim. You're willing to just do anything and everything you can to get elected and to just make sure that your approval ratings are where you need to be to survive in the White House. You're willing to do just about anything. And that's been the criticism of the Democrats really since the Clinton era. If you're just willing to lie about all these different things, ends don't justify the means. They just don't. And yes, politicians do lie. I mean, that's sort of part of our American DNA. But why do it on this issue, particularly when economy is the number one issue? You have no credibility.
Let's do a speed round with 2 items. We see many of the polls, even those that are typically friendly to Democrats, skewing toward Donald Trump. Either the lead of Harris in swing states or nationally is getting smaller, or he is taking the lead in several of those. So things are swinging toward him uniformly across the country. Does that mean anything? We still got a little time left to go here, but people are voting in the meantime. It doesn't all happen in that first Tuesday in November anymore. So does that have a meaning? Does that give Republicans reason to be encouraged? Does that give Democrats a reason to be worried?
Well, the early vote probably is more important. The data that's coming in on the early vote, the returns out of Nevada and Georgia are out of this world good for President Trump. Is he sabotaging an election day vote? We'll see. Or is he finding more rural voters that previously just didn't make it out on election day? I think it's the latter, but we'll see. The polls correlate to the good early vote returns, and maybe the polls were overstating Kamala's support the whole way. We'll see. It's tough not to be incredibly optimistic if you're the Trump campaign right now. You're closing well, your candidate's having fun. You've got a rally coming up in Madison Square Garden on Sunday night. That's a huge, huge deal. It's tough not to be optimistic if you're not a Trump supporter. But you got to go finish the deal. You got to go run through the tape. And the Democrats are shopping story after story to try to take him out. And so it's going to be up to the independent voter to say, now, wait a minute, like what this salacious, outrageous accusation, another one against Trump, do I believe it? Or do I discern that this is just, the Democrats playing politics? I think you've got to opt for the latter, because we would have heard about it by now. They've thrown everything they can, including trying to kill him. And so I think you've got to be really optimistic if you're the Trump campaign.
Final question. Do you worry at all, and I don't mean, it occurs to you that it could happen, but I mean, do you legitimately worry that cheating or corruption could change the outcome of this thing? That say everything is really tight in Michigan and Detroit, which has a long history of corruption and cheating on the ballot, that Detroit could tip Michigan and in turn tip the entire country, or someone else, Atlanta in Georgia? Or do you worry that we could end up with an inauthentic, to stay on the theme today, with a unreal, a cheated, a wrong number that comes out at the far end?
I think that bad ballots, and what I mean by that is, I do not think that government election agencies, state government election agencies, can verify a vote that has been same-day registered with no ID and only signature verification. I don't think they do that very well. If you want to talk about like proving negatives, there's just really no evidence that a government agency has done much of anything very well. But you can't prove that they do that very well, and I don't think they can. Will it keep it closer than it should be? Yes. Is Trump's margin going to be too big to rig? I believe so.
And I said that was the final question, but I have one more, and I need you to answer it in like 15 seconds or less.
Yeah.
Election day is on a Tuesday. When are we going to find out who won? Will it be Tuesday night? Will it be Wednesday during the day? Will it be 2 days or 2 weeks later?
I think you'll find out Tuesday night. Yeah, if not beforehand, because the early vote returns, if these things, we've had a couple of days of this now, the early vote returns continue to be strong, and I think we're going to know in fairly short order that President Trump will be back in the White House.
For America, he is David Bozell from the Washington Times. I'm Tim Constantine. Thank you.